And I'm going to begin reading in verse 13. James chapter 3 and beginning in verse 13. I'm reading from the New International Version. As I said, it is page 979 in your Bibles there in the pews. And if you're on a device, we're in the New International Version. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but it is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven or from above is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Let's pray. Father, we come before you again today, thanking you that we can be together in this place to study your word, to worship together. And Father, I'm thankful for all those that have taken time out of their schedule to come out today as we look into your word together and look especially at this very, very important topic in this most important text. So, Father, as always, we pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts would be acceptable in your sight. Oh God, our strength and our Redeemer. In Christ's name, we ask it. Amen. You perhaps maybe have been living under a rock, no offense, if you didn't hear of what has been happening this week with the college entrance scandal. It has been amazing. How many of you watch Hallmark movies? My wife does. My wife's like, really? The Hallmark movie lady? I go, yeah, it's all fiction, isn't it? The fact that, and if you didn't see what happened, there were a lot of these very privileged Hollywood types and CEOs were literally paying for their kids to either, they were actually creating sports profiles for them where they would superimpose their faces on different sporting events and like playing soccer or things like that. And they were getting scholarships and then people were getting paid behind the scenes. It was this elaborate scheme. Well, as you know, this week, if you've watched it, Lori Loughlin, who happens to be the Hallmark movie star, she has now lost all of her endorsements. They've pulled everything from Hallmark. And her daughter, who was an Instagram influencer, and if you're going to ask me what that is, if you don't know, don't worry about it. If you know, then you know what I'm talking about. The daughter, who was an Instagram influencer, lost all of her sponsorships from Sephora. And so and by the way, the girls decided that it would be best for them to withdraw from college because they're afraid now of bullying. I looked at that, and I know if you did like I do, I looked at that and I went, what? How can somebody that's so smart be so stupid? Now, have you ever seen somebody that you thought was really, really smart, and you're left scratching your head and you're going, why'd they do that? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Do you ever notice that it's really, really easy to pick out the dumb stuff that other people do? But let me ask you this. Have you ever done something really, really stupid and thought to yourself, man, that was really, really dumb. Why did I do something that was so stupid? You know you're going down the wrong path. You know you're doing the wrong thing. You know that it's going to create a situation later on. You know that it's going to be a problem, and yet you take the action anyway. And after you're all done, you go, man, that was dumb. Why did I do that? See, the thing is we all have our stuff. We all have our unwise things that we do in our lives. We all have those moments when we take a step, we do an action, we do something that we know is going to create the problems, and we do it anyway, and then somebody else may be saying to us, boy, that was really stupid. How can they do something that dumb? Well, it's actually very easy because of how we are wired. You know, I said on our video this week, what if you were able to ask God something, and God said, you can have one desire of your heart. Whatever you want, one thing, no restrictions, what would you ask for? Would it be a car? Would it be a house? Would it be a college debt paid off? Would it be a certain amount of money that you could live off of and then you wouldn't have to work? Would it be a new job, a new partner, a new whatever? What would it be? The one guy in history that sort of changed all of that was that guy by the name of Solomon. Now, we're not looking at Solomon, but I want to refer to him again because Solomon was a guy when God came to him and said, Solomon, you can have anything you want. He said, give me wisdom. And remember, it was Solomon who said, trying to find out who the real mother was of the child, said, well, cut the child in half. And the real mother says, no, let her have him because the real mother is going to protect the child. And that's where we get that terminology, as I said, the wisdom of Solomon. Solomon is considered to be one of the wisest guys, wisest people in history. Because he had that wisdom, he was able to handle all of the wealth, all of the power, all of the fame. But let me tell you, if you get wealth, if you get power, if you get fame, if you get all of those things, but you don't have the wisdom to know how to handle it, you'll see, well, you can see it play it every day. It's called Washington, D.C. It happens every single day. Because they've got the power, they've got the fame, they've got the money, but there's so little of this one thing called wisdom. We've been in this study in James, and if you remember, 2 weeks ago we were talking about the tongue, and it actually started out in James chapter 3, verse 1, where he says, my brethren, don't let many of you be teachers, because if you are, you're going to receive a stricter judgment. The idea is that people who are using more words, there's going to be closer judgment. Anytime you use your words for a living, let me tell you what, your words can get used against you. I said, there's nothing worse, and especially when my kids were living at home, that I would say something on Sunday morning, and sure enough, by Sunday afternoon, I was hearing my sermon again, and it wasn't on tape. It was from my wife or one of the kids. Well, didn't you say blah, blah, blah? Because we all do it. So James is actually continuing a thought here when he starts to talk about wisdom. But as I unpacked this, I thought, wow, this is scary, frightening, but also enlightening what he talks to us about. So the context that we're still looking at was James chapter 3, verse 1. So he's talked about the tongue, then he asks the question. He says, who is wise and understanding among you? Now, what's interesting about this is we have said over and over and over again, if there was a problem that he's addressing, there's probably somebody, if he asks a question like this, there's probably somebody in the church that is claiming to have some kind of wisdom. So he said, who is wise and understanding among you? There's a good chance that there was a teachers, people that were in the public eye in the churches that he had in mind, was writing to, that were saying, you know what? You've got to listen to us. We've got the wisdom. We've got the understanding. You listen to what I say. You listen to what I tell you to do. Remember, it was much different times, of course, then too. You think about even with the Reformation, we were able to, get the scriptures in our hands, but it used to be that it was the pastor or it was the priest that told you what to believe and was supposedly the smartest person in the room. So you went there for all the education, and around the church, of course, was the pastor and the doctor were the most educated people out on the prairie. But now he says, listen, the people who are wise among you, they need to make sure that they are functioning in a right way. And so he says, so if somebody thinks they're wise and understanding, he says, that's great. They're telling you that. They're going to tell you, no, let me tell you how to do this. Let me tell you how it's going to be. Let me tell you what you need to do. And they're always talking with some type of authority. He said, let them show it. James is into this, isn't he? He is not into talking. He's heard enough. James knew how the Pharisees were. Pharisees were good at talking. They were good at telling you how you needed to behave in your life. They were good at telling you how your relationship should be, how your religious teaching should be. They were good at telling you how you should conduct your business. They were good at even telling you how you should dress and what you should believe. And he says, listen, let them show it by their good life. It's good. But then he goes a little deeper and says, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. Whoops. Deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. Here's the problem. You can do a lot of good things in your life. But he says the deeds have to be done, because you know how somebody can do a deed, but they do it at just the right time, in just the right place, in just the right way, so that just enough people see it. You probably see people like that at work, right? They seem like they're doing it, and they're looking to make sure that somebody else is watching them. And he says these deeds literally need to be done in humility. Like as if nobody else is going to be there. And it need to be done with wisdom. Now let's talk about this word wisdom for a moment. In the book of James, he uses two different Greek words for wisdom. The one that he uses here is the word sophos. Have you heard the term sophomore? You know, it's made up of two Greek words, sophos and moron, or moron. Seriously. When you say somebody's sophomoric, think about it. When your kid enters 10th grade, they know everything. Because they're no longer a freshman anymore, right? But they haven't graduated, but by the time they're a sophomore, they're a wise fool. Because that's what sophomore means. Okay? So he uses the word sophos here. Now, he's not talking about an intellectual wisdom that was often popular in this culture where they would elevate that. But he was talking about somebody who had this sort of skill in living that knew how to get along with people. It wasn't just that they had an intellectual knowledge, but they knew how to take what they believed and what they did and apply it in every situation. So he says, make sure that if somebody who says they're understanding, who says that they've got all of their act together, make sure that they are showing it with humility and skill. It's all about how they are carrying it out. But he goes on. He goes, but, there's always the but. He raises it now. But, if you harbor, you know what it means to harbor, I don't have to explain that. If you're hanging on to it, if you keep running it over and over and over in your mind and your heart. But if you harbor, and then he doesn't just say envy, he says bitter envy. Now, it's interesting, the two words here, because he's used envy and ambition. Notice that there's a qualifier between each of them, because the two different Greek words that are used for envy and ambition are not necessarily bad. It depends on the context. So James says, if you're harboring bitter envy, you know what envy is. We used to call it being like the who? The Joneses. I've never met the Joneses. I have no idea who they are, but I know that my dad used to tell me you don't want to be like the Joneses. Never met the family. I know, obviously, what he was saying, that when you see what someone else has, it's okay if you go, gee, I'd like to do that, I'd like to have that. But if you have bitterness to the point that, how come they have that and I don't? I'm just as good as they are. In fact, I'm smarter than them, and I would be doing this much better. You know, that's what he's talking about, that type of envy. That turns into bitterness where you are over and over and over again looking at what somebody else has and saying, how come they got that and I don't? And you get more and more angry. So there's bitter envy. So he says there's a bitterness that occurs. And then he says this, selfish ambition. Is ambition bad? No. We want our kids to be ambitious. We want them to go for their dreams. But then he says this selfish ambition is the kind that says, look, I'm going to go do whatever I want to do, and I'm going to do it at your expense, and this is about me. It's not about us, and it's not about you. It's about what I want. And I am going to plow through and get my agenda done, regardless of how it impacts you. I mentioned Washington. That's what happens all the time. There's a reason why I'll keep mentioning Washington throughout this. By the end, you'll understand why. But you think about the selfish ambition, because it's like, no, I need to get more money. I need to get more power. And it doesn't matter who else it impacts or who else it affects. So he says, if you are literally harboring these things in your heart, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, he said, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Don't say, and when he's talking about boasting about it, he's talking about people who are saying it, well, no, I do care about you. That's why I'm doing this. It's almost like a narcissistic person who is boasting about it. Yeah, we're going to do this together, but meanwhile, they're going to do it together for me. So you got to watch out for these people that have an agenda where they're saying that they're doing it for you. They're saying that they're on the team. They're saying that they're a part of it, but meanwhile, it's all about them. And it's all about what they want. I was going to, but I decided it was probably against my best interest today, was going to play the Toby Keith song, I Want to Talk About Me. You can go home and look at it on YouTube. It's pretty funny, where people always still want to talk about me. We're always talking about everybody else. And he says, you think about this, don't do that. And then he kicks it up a notch further. Like you say, well, I got to think about me, because if I don't think about me, nobody else is going to think about me. You start to try to rationalize it. He says, such wisdom And then it's in parentheses. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven. And then he punches us right in the nose. But it is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. But other than that, it's okay. Wow. That kind of wisdom that produces selfish ambition and bitter envy doesn't come down from heaven, but it's earthly, it's unspiritual, and it's even demonic. What was the thing that caused Lucifer's fall? I'm going to be like God. What was the thing that caused Adam and Eve? I'm going to be like God, knowing good and evil. Saw the tree was good for food, pleasing the eyes, desiring of making her wise. She took the fruit and ate. She gave it to her husband who was with her and ate. All of that came from selfish ambition and what they wanted at the moment. Now, here's the thing that I looked at, and when I read this, I went, what? For where you have envy, or you can read bitter envy and selfish ambition. Now watch this. Look at what he says. There you have, I've read James before. Did you ever see this? Wherever you have those two things, two other things follow. Disorder. Disorder. Disorganization. Chaos. And every evil practice. Wow. Now, let's reverse engineer this. If you've got disorder continuously in a place in your life, let's back up a little bit. Because what he's saying is, if I have disorder and chaos in my marriage, I better be careful, because probably if I back into it, there's probably some type of selfish ambition or bitter envy. If I have disorder and chaos, now there are other people who create issues in our career, but if I have it and it's constantly going on and it's over and over and over again, I at least have to reverse engineer and back up and say, now wait a minute, do I have some type of bitter envy or selfish ambition? If every church that I go to, and we know people that have church hopped, and everywhere they go there's a problem. Everywhere. And what they don't realize is that the reason why there's a problem everywhere they go is because they are there. Right? And everywhere that I go, there's a problem because I'm there, because I'm a human being, and because we all want certain things that we want. So he literally says, if you want disorder in the church, and you see a bunch of disorder going on, and it's constant, there's some type of selfish ambition, and there's some kind of bitter envy that's going on. If it's going on and you carry it out into your business, you carry it out into your career, you carry it out into whatever you're doing, or when you want to create massive disorder, then go ahead and cheat your way into school and see what happens later on when you get caught. We talked about it at the beginning. It's created utter chaos and disorder. He said, flowing out of all these things, did you catch that? Flowing out of bitter envy and selfish ambition is disorder. And he says, not just one evil practice, every evil practice flows from those two things. And that's why James said, listen, it's earthly. It's unspiritual. It's even demonic. And when you are living in this way and you have this bitter envy and this selfish ambition, you're going to create and have created in your life utter disorder, chaos, and open the door to every evil practice. Doesn't that sound fun? There's always a but, though. He says, but. Now then, notice this. So this is a wisdom from beneath. Now he says, wisdom from beneath, the wisdom that's in this world, the wisdom that's demonic, that's unspiritual, is its bitter envy, its selfish ambition, which if you look at our commercials, you look at music, you look at all of these things that are going on in our culture, the commercials are all designed to get me to buy something because somebody else has what I don't have. Women, God bless them, God bless you all, are bombarded when you go through the Publix line and you look at the women that are on the covers of the magazine and they're telling you, you have to look like this, when meanwhile, they all get exposed and we realize none of them look like that because they've used Photoshop. But they try to sell you on that. And so then it's, well, you have to buy this. It'll make you like it. Or if you do this, you'll get rich. If you do this, you'll be like this guy. Do you remember years ago there was a real estate guy, a Vietnamese guy supposedly came over, was an immigrant and all that. His name was Tommy Vu, and he was selling, teaching you how to buy and invest in real estate. And he'd go out there on a boat. Meanwhile, it turns out he rented the yacht and he rented all these female models that were scantily clad. And, oh, you can have this too if you will just buy my course. He wound up bankrupt and God only knows where he's at now. But those things are designed and they tap into that earthly wisdom. But he says, let's contrast it. Let's look at the heavenly wisdom. He says the wisdom that comes from above is, first of all, it's going to be pure. In other words, there are pure motives. It's not just about me, it's about we. He says it's going to be pure. And then he says, peace-loving. Now let's stop here. Because James is going to make a big deal about peace. Now, if I just said peace, and in your mind you immediately went, but what about? There's the issue. Because we want to immediately argue about what kind of peace is he talking about? Because we've got to take a stand for the truth, or we've got to take a stand for what we believe in. That's not what he's talking about there. He's talking about doing our best to seek to live at peace where we can. Paul talked about it in Romans. He says, as much as it lies within you, as much as it depends on you, as far as you could do it on your side, he said, seek to live peaceably with all men, with all people. The best that you can, knowing that you're responsible for you. You're not always going to be able to live at peace with people, but he says, listen, if you look at this, it's pure, then it's peace-loving. And then he says it's considerate, the absolute opposite of selfish ambition. That means when I get ready to say something to my wife, because here's the thing, my wife's not here this morning, but she'll wind up listening to the recording because somebody will sure enough text her and said, he was talking about you, so I know she'll listen to it. So, listen, in a marriage, let's face it, you've been together for a few years, you know what makes each other tick, and you know what ticks each other off. Right? And you know, as well as I do, that you know how to use each of those when you need to get the response that you so desire. Right? You know how to, like, I know before I say something, this is probably going to create a problem. But you know what Bob does? He says it anyway. I bet you do the same thing. Oh, I knew he was. Well, what do you mean? Why are you responding like that? Well, I knew it was going to do that. We know what makes each other tick, and we know what ticks each other off. And he says, you're actually going to be considering the other person when you speak to them. You're going to be considering the other person when you're talking with them, when you are working with them, when you're doing all these things. He says, this wisdom is actually going to be considerate. Then he goes on. He says, submissive. Oh, I was looking for like another Greek word for that. And the Greek word means submissive. What he's saying is, it's a mutual submission thing. It's what Jesus said, where if I being your Lord and your master am washing your feet. Remember when he said that to the disciples? You ought to wash one another's feet. It's a servant leadership. You know, the model of leadership in our world today, in corporations and things, and they finally, by the way, started to talk about servant leadership. We've been talking about it for years, that the servant leader is the one that's actually holding everybody else up, not pushing them down, saying, you do this, you do that, get me this, get me that. But it's actually, there's a little funny side note. Finally, somebody came out with a book, and Pam and I love it. It's called Leaders Eat Last. Now, what's funny is we've tried to show our kids that. I'm just saying this, for years when we've had meals and things like that, we're always the last ones to eat because we got to make sure that everybody else is taken care of. It's just been something that we've done. And I'm like, so we always try to tell our kids, look, especially if you're in charge, back up and let somebody else go first. It's always interesting because I can tell, and especially now, one of the best things you can do to interview people, if you're going to hire them, is take them out for a meal and watch how they function. It's amazing. My father-in-law years ago actually didn't hire a guy because the guy was going to be a salesperson, and they ordered the food, and before the gentleman tasted his food, he put salt and pepper on it. And my father-in-law, and I said, why did you not hire him? He said, because he didn't even taste it first to see if it needed it. He just made an assumption. I was like, wow. Father-in-law wound up being a pretty smart guy. See, but we take actions based on assumptions. And so he says, listen, you got to be considerate. You got to be submissive. And then he says, full of mercy and good fruit. Like not just like overflowing with reaching out first, that our first response is going to be mercy and not criticism. Our first response is going to be, man, I wonder what their story is. I wonder what it is that caused them to do that. I wonder what's going on behind the scenes. Because one of the things that I found out is that it's easy for me to disagree with somebody politically online and to call them names and to do all that stuff until I'm standing face to face with them and I actually know them and I find out their story. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, if, as I've said so often, if I grew up how they grew up and I lived where they lived and I grew up in the background that they grew in, there's most likely I'd be responding exactly the same way. As everybody has a story. And so he says, listen, he says, I want you to make sure that you is full of mercy and good fruit. And then he says two words that are really, really important. Oh, man. And I searched for a way around these two also. I have to tell you, especially this next one. He says impartial. James is so big on this. He is so big on impartiality. This is, again, he addresses it again. Because he addressed it early on and said, listen, if the rich man comes in and this guy comes in and you tell the rich guy, you sit over here, but the person who comes in that doesn't look like they have anything, you put him down here. Basically, shame on you. You're a respecter of persons. He says, you're supposed to be impartial. Now, the most popular thing to do today is immediately when you disagree with somebody on the other side, and this is just as bad, they call you a racist, or a homophobe, or whatever. We've gotten into this name-calling thing. And it's so easy to do that, to be a keyboard warrior, and to call everybody names. But he says, listen, you literally, if you want the wisdom from above, you are going to strive to be impartial. That I'm not going to treat you any different if you're a male, you any different if you're a female. I'm not going to treat you any different if you have money, you any different if you don't. And by the way, if you think that you're going to do that, you put mechanisms in place so that you don't. Because there's no room for prejudice in wisdom. Of course, we all grew up in our particular points of view, and it takes a lot to shake them. I've told you what mine were. My dad did not like Canadians and New Yorkers when I was growing up. It's just how we grew up. I grew up in the South. Now, was that the right thing? No. It wasn't the right thing. But I had to learn, because listen, you learn prejudice, which means you can unlearn it too. And so he says impartial. And then here's the final one. He says, and sincere. You know what the word behind that is? The root word is the hypokritos. It's the hypocrite. It's the opposite of being a hypocrite. He said that you and I, if we have this wisdom, are going to be sincere. That what you see is what you get. That it's not just, by the way, somebody who's a hypocrite, which is literally doing something to deceive somebody else and to be something that they're not. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean inconsistent. You're going to be inconsistent, because if you're on this planet and you're trying to live and you've got struggles and you've got things that are going on, you're going to go out there, you're going to do your best to say, this is what I'm going to beat this addiction. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And suddenly you're not going to do it. And somebody's going to go, oh, you're a hypocrite. No, because you had every intention of doing the right thing. What do you do when you blow it? You go, I blew that. I blew that. I did it. Not trying to sneak around it, lie around. I did that. And that's what he says. The wisdom, true wisdom, is going to be sincere. And then he says it again. He says, listen. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. What? He says basically, it's a very difficult kind of phrase to translate. So what he's talking about is that those seeds that we plant, that we think about, if we are thinking constantly about how am I responding to you? How are you responding to me? How is this working between us? And you're thinking about the relationship over everything else. He says, you sow that, you're going to reap a harvest of righteousness. In other words, if you want that wisdom that comes from above, it means that I've got to go from thinking about me to we. That I have to remember this one phrase if we don't remember anything else. It's not about me, it's all about we. Just think about that for a moment. It's not about me, it's all about we. If I start to think about we when I make decisions here, if I start to think about we when I make decisions in my home, I've shared with you all the story of the car that I got one time because we were newly married and I was the man of the house and I bought a new car without telling my wife. Now my wife, God bless her, is one of these people that said to me, well, honey, it's your decision. You're the head of the house. No problem. It was the worst car I've ever had in my life. I parked by a dumpster one time and a roach got in it. It fell on my head going down I-95. Seriously. The radio came out and it would flip back and forth out of the car. It was the worst car I've ever had in my life. So guess what I do now? Honey, what do you think about this vehicle? Because I'm making me decisions instead of we decisions. Vain conceit, this selfish ambition, this bitter envy is just making decisions based on me. It's, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take this job regardless of what the rest of my family thinks. I'm going to do this regardless of what everybody else thinks. I'm going to do this regardless of how it impacts everybody else because this is my time. You ever anybody say that? It's really good, especially early on before you have kids. You really start thinking, yeah, I'll never forget when we first got married, every weekend we would go away. Every weekend. Hey, let's go to the Keys. Hey, let's go here. Hey, let's go there. And we had a kid who was like, hey, we're not going anywhere. Because suddenly we had to think about that little one. And then you think, oh, it's pretty cool because now they're kind of independent. You're not changing diapers anymore. And then you got to think about taking them here and taking them there and going there. Then all of a sudden you think, oh, this is good. They're graduating from high school. Then you go, oh my goodness, college. And so every financial decision that you make is now about we. It's not about me. And even now, every financial decision, every decision about what kind of house we're living in, what kind of vehicle we're going to buy, everything that we do has to be about we. We can't make decisions apart from that. And that's what he's saying. The wisdom that is earthly says, it's all about me. I'm going to make the decisions all about me. And I'm going to function in this world where it's all about me. That's what I mentioned Washington, D.C. Everybody has their own agenda. You can defend your side all you want to, but I'm going to tell you, every single one of them, from the very top to the bottom, I can't think of maybe 5 on one hand that I would trust. Because everybody is so concerned about getting reelected, so concerned about what they want, so concerned about keeping their job, that we say whatever we want, we criticize, do whatever we want, and that's it. But God has called us as his people to live differently. To make it about we, not just about me. One of the highlights when we were in San Diego this week, we had a couple of business things because Pam got that award on Thursday. And so we were kind of busy Wednesday, Thursday. We decided on the weekend to drive 2.5 hours to Simi Valley, California, where the Reagan Presidential Library was. And I have to tell you, I think he was the first president that I voted for. And I remember I was in there and I'm looking at the communication. Of course, obviously in every part at every library, they're going to present the very best and they don't also present the worst. But it was cool because you see the hostages being released right at his inauguration, and you see some of the other things. But what struck me was two places where we went through, and one place I nerded out because it was the teleprompter and one of his speeches, and they had the podium, and I was like, oh, this is cool. They had the teleprompter running, and you could get behind it. But two things that really, a couple things that struck me, but one of the things that struck me was the one place where we had the Challenger disaster, and he was trying to get to the nation and look, we're kind of all together, and let's get everybody together, and let's, and he gave that great speech on television about it. But then I went into another room, and it was a screen, and it was him talking, taking responsibility. Some of you, now I'm dating myself, remember the whole Iran Contra thing, the whole Contra thing that went on, and he literally, I was watching him, and I stood there, and I watched him say, make no mistake, this is my responsibility. And I went, nobody does that today. Everybody spins on it. Everybody goes, no, that's not what I meant, or you twisted my words. Everybody's kind of trying to get there. But he just said, oh, look, I did it. This happened. Oh, okay. And I thought, to me, that's what leadership is. I don't care where you are in the aisle, because you can point to people on both sides, but this is the one that I remember and the one that's in my mind. I was like, good Lord, have we come so far that we don't have leaders anymore that think about us? They think about what's in it for them. And even more so for us as believers. He says, listen, you want the wisdom that comes from above. And the wisdom that comes from above says, it's not about me, it's about we. And if we can just keep that in mind, just like with Solomon, not that we're going to get rich and powerful and all of those things, but if God brings things to us in that way, we'll be able to handle it, because we'll still know, even if we have it all, that it's not about me. Let's pray.